Last week we started looking at the subject, the power of decisions, and talking about pre-deciding the things that we can. And it's one of those things that we know we can't know every scenario that's coming. We can't figure out, okay, here's how I'm going to handle absolutely everything. But there are those things that are values of life that are um, character principles that we can determine ahead of time and say, these are going to be the guidelines that help me when I'm faced with temptation, when I'm faced with struggles, when I'm faced with choice. These are the things that are going to help me know in that moment what the right decision is and take some of that um, stress, strain, um, just the temptation of making a decision in the moment of how easy it is to begin to rationalize and justify those things. And so we talked about that last week. And we talked about the quality of our lives is often determined by the quality of our decisions. And as I said that last week, I went home thinking, well, I hope nobody takes that as I mean that the only reason we have problems is bad decisions, because the reality is other people make bad decisions that sometimes influence us as well. So it's not one of those things where I'm trying to say it's all our fault, never something else involved, but there are just so many times where when we really begin to look at things, boy, I just made a dumb decision on that. I ate too much because it looked too good or whatever the situation is. And so this thought of kind of before the heat of the moment saying, when I'm faced with this type of thing, I've already decided this is going to be the guideline for my response. And so we talked about that with um, getting our values clear. And so we said over the course of about the next 6 weeks, we're going to talk about these subjects of pre-deciding to be ready, to be consistent, to be devoted, to be generous, to be faithful, to be a finisher. And so this morning, um, our lesson is about I'm ready. And the reality is we've all given in to temptations of some type. Scripture is clear. We have all sinned. We've all fallen short of the glory of God. It's the reason Jesus had to come in the first place. If everybody else was perfect, he still had to come for me because I've sinned. But I'm not in the boat alone. We've all sinned. And so the question sort of becomes, why have we all sinned? And the answer a lot of times was, I just wasn't ready for the situation. Um, I think back to some of my bigger mistakes. I wasn't wise enough, old enough for the situation I put myself in. I wasn't ready for making a decision of that level. Um, some of them I hit those teenager years where I knew everything. Mom and dad didn't know anything. Um, those with kids, it's coming. You know, what's the old joke? I turned 13 and my folks were the dumbest people on the planet. When I turned 18, it was amazing how much they learned in 5 years. Uh, you know, those types of things. Uh, Paul says in 1 Corinthians 16 and in verse 13, be on your guard, stand firm in the faith, be courageous, and be strong. Paul's saying, be ready. You know things are going to be coming at you. We know as Christians, Satan is going to be trying to drag us back to where we were. And so he says, be on your guard. Matthew 26 and verse 41, Jesus tells his disciples, watch and pray so that you will not fall into temptation. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. That was why they were in the garden. And remember, Jesus went aside to pray, Father, let this cup pass from me. He came back and found his disciples asleep. He woke them up and said, watch and pray. There is a moment just ahead of us where Satan is going to be tempting us in all kinds of ways. He's going to be tempting Jesus to do something to keep him from going to the cross. His disciples, when the crowd came, there was the temptation to fight. Peter even drew the sword, cut off the ear. Jesus stopped it all. Jesus says, those types of things are coming. I've already told you, somebody's going to deny me tonight. Somebody's going to turn me over to the authorities. Peter, I've told you, you're going to deny my name 3 times before this night is over. Watch and pray. I know spiritually you want to do what's right, but the flesh falls prey. And that's still true for us today. And the truth is still, Satan is coming for you. He knows our hearts as well as God does, it seems. He knows those things that just appeal to me just enough to draw me away from God. Those things that I have to be able to stand firm against, that I have to be able to combat. And so Paul gives this warning again, 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 12. If you think you are standing firm, be careful that you don't fall. We can get so overconfident that preparation goes out the window. I said last week that this series is not new to me, or the concept, the ideas behind it are not new to me. In that prep work that I was looking at, it said that they had some studies that showed that we tend to overestimate our ability to resist. None of us think we're going to be the ones to fall, do we? We all think we're stronger than we are. I would never be the one to cheat on my wife. I would never be the one to rob a bank. I would never be the one, we've got all these things. I would never try drugs. Well, you know what they say about never? Never say never. Because we don't know the circumstances we can find ourselves in. And the reality is, nobody ever set out or planned to make bad decisions. Nobody ever planned to find themselves in a position where they needed to file bankruptcy. Nobody ever planned to put themselves in a position to be hooked on drugs, to be addicted to porn, to be addicted to alcohol, or whatever other addiction it might be. Nobody ever set out to plan to wreck their marriage. We don't typically plan to do stupid stuff. It just happens. Or at least that's what we rationalize and say on the backside. There's an old saying, if you're not, I'm going to say it wrong. If you're failing to plan, you're planning to fail. The way it says it. We don't plan to wreck our lives. The question is, do we plan not to? And that's what this pre-deciding is all about. It's about saying, I know there are moments waiting that can wreck my life, can wreck the life of my family, can wreck the life of my loved ones, those around me. am I trying to put a plan in place to make sure that doesn't happen? And so this morning we want to talk about three keys to fighting temptation. Three areas of pre-deciding. We're going to talk about moving the line, magnifying the cost, and planning your escape. So moving the line. The line typically ends up being, how close can I get to something without sinning? I've done in previous lessons the example that I did with the youth group at Mary Camp one time. It's kind of like that tightrope. If this step is walking with God and this is sin out here, we try to get right there and walk right on the edge of that step. How close can I get to the world and that sin without falling into it? Why? I know there are thrill seekers that the closer they walk to danger, the happier they are. But most of us don't do that with anything else in our lives except doing that spiritually. How close can I stay to the things of the world compared to how close can I get to God? If I'm serious about being with God for eternity, I ought to want to stay as far away from the edge of that cliff as I can. And so when we talk about moving the line, I don't want my line to be drawn down the edge of that step. I don't want it to be right there at the edge of sin. I want to draw my line over here so that I'm walking on a nice, big, wide platform with God, safe. I have to I have to add to that. I can only draw that line for myself. One of the problems that churches have faced through the years is churches have tried to draw that line for everybody. The Pharisees tried to draw that line for everybody in Scripture. They remember the Sabbath and keep it holy. And for them, it became, you can't do any work at all. You can't walk more than this distance. You can't do more than this. You can't. They came with all these lists of rules and said, everybody's got to follow our list of rules. And as long as you follow it, then you'll never break the command. Remember the Sabbath, keep it holy. It's okay to draw that line for yourself, but you can't force that on somebody else. But as a Christian, I need to draw that line. I need to say, I want to be as far away from that as I can. It's the reason I don't let myself get somewhere with a woman other than my wife, with just me and her. I'm going to draw that line further over here. If we need to talk, we could be in a group setting, or at the very least, my wife could be present with us while we talk. Uh, why face that temptation? The reality is, those types of things, they never start off as planning for an affair. It starts off as a simple counseling or just friends talking, and it develops over time. We've got to move the line. And you say, well, if I do that, excuse me, if I do that, doesn't that constrict my life? Doesn't that make life unpleasant at times? David said this about it. The boundary lines have fallen for me in pleasant places. Surely I have a delightful inheritance. This is David who said, teach me your ways, O Lord. Let me walk with you. Secondly, we've got to magnify the cost or be aware of the cost. The person that developed this said magnify. It's not that we're making the cost any bigger, it's just that we're being aware of what the totality of the cost may be. Think in terms of worst case scenario. May not always come out that way, but usually it snowballs. It starts and it just keeps building till it ends up at worst case. We have loss of trust, loss of reputation, loss of job, might cost us a marriage, might cost us a relationship with our kids, or worst case scenario, it may cost me heaven. In Numbers chapter 32, verse 33, Moses is talking to the two tribes that they've arrived at the edge of the promised land. And these two tribes were the herding tribes, and they saw how good the land on that side of the river was for their animals. They said, we don't think we want to cross the river and take up land on that side. We want this land. And Moses told them, said, that's okay, but you're going to go across the river and you're going to help everybody else fight and take their land because we helped you get this. And he tells them, if you fail to do this, you'll be sinning against the Lord, and you may be sure that your sin will find you out. Well, that's the reality of sin. Sin always finds us out. You hear people say, well, what if I promise you nobody would ever know? If you're making the promise, somebody already knows. I know, you'll know, God knows. And even if I know I'll never talk, I don't know about you. And even if you don't ever talk, God still knows. Sin will always find us out. The reality is, it only takes a moment of sin to wreck a lifetime. Homes have been torn apart because of a 5-minute affair that was an unintended, quick thing, guilt of the moment, assured it was never going to happen again type of thing. But it destroyed everything. Satan's coming for us. We've got to get as far away from him as we can. We have got to make ourselves completely aware of the cost so that we want to get as far away from it as possible. And so we've got to plan our escape. You may remember the story in Genesis chapter 39, story of Joseph. His brothers hated him because he was the youngest and the favorite. They sold him into slavery, and God blessed him through it. He's a slave in Potiphar's house, and his master, who is fairly high in the Egyptian authority, puts Joseph in charge of everything in his house, all of his business. The only thing that Joseph is not over is Potiphar and his wife. And so verse 6, Potiphar left everything he had in Joseph's care with Joseph in charge, and he did not concern himself with anything except the food he ate. But Joseph was well built and handsome. And after a while, his master's wife took notice of Joseph and said, "Come to bed with me." She's trying to initiate, trying to draw him in. But Joseph had some easy excuses, didn't he? I'm a slave. She's considered the master. I'm just following orders. Everybody else is gone. It's just me and her. Nobody'd ever find out. Well, God put me here. He let me be sold into slavery. He put me in this house. You know, we can rationalize these things all kinds of ways. But Joseph began planning how he was going to deal with this because he knew he couldn't do that. Verse 12, she came to him again. She caught him by his cloak and said, "Come to bed with me." But he left his cloak in her hand and ran out of the house. It was better to face punishment for the wrong things than to do the wrong thing. Joseph, it was better to leave a coat behind than to sin against his master, sin against God. He moved the line. He knew he wasn't strong enough to stay put, but he was strong enough to run. Paul writes passages that we rely on so often. God will not allow us to be tempted beyond that which we can withstand, except that he provides a way of escape. Most of the time, everybody wants to grab the first part of that verse. God won't let me be tempted beyond what I can withstand. I'm strong. The more temptation that's thrown at me must just mean that I'm even stronger, because God won't let it come at me if I'm not strong enough to handle it. They skip the last half of that verse, the way of escape. It doesn't promise that God won't let something come at us that we can't handle. It says that he'll always give us a way of escape when it gets to that point. So we work ourselves through to plan our escape, making these pre-decisions. And the first one is, I'm going to be ready. Satan is going to be coming at me. I'm going to be on the watch. I'm going to be alert. I'm going to be paying attention to the things that may put me in a compromising position. And where I can identify them ahead of time and do something about it, I'm going to stay as far away from those as I can. And when I can't, I'm at least, if it catches me, I'm at least going to be trying to run away. I'm trying to make my escape, and God says that escape is possible. Next week, we'll move on to our second thing, being consistent. And it's going to be a little bit of a twist in what being consistent means. Uh, but I don't want to give that away yet. That's your cliffhanger teaser to have you back next week. All right. So the lesson is yours.